Good afternoon again. I want to invite you to open your scriptures to chapter 2 of Romans, and I want to consider this faithful God who is the judge of all the earth, and he is the judge of both the Jew and the Gentile, and the gospel comes forth from this God. And it considers chapter 1, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek, or the Gentiles. And now the righteous judge is casting down his judgment upon both Jew and Gentile. He is revealing himself as the righteous one, the one who reveals his just standard before all who listen. The nation of Israel receives the law, the special revelation of God. It's written on their hearts. And by this very vehicle, by this very thing that God gives to the nation, should convict the Gentiles. But rather what's going on in chapter 2, the Gentiles who do not have the law are the ones condemning the nation of Israel. They're the ones who are abiding by conscience or by what they see in natural law altogether. But the Jews are the ones who have received God's oracles, and both oral and written revelation, and yet they're not even obeying the law that's written on their heart. And so as you look at the universal scope of chapter 3, namely as you move forward to Romans 9 through 20 shows us the universal scope of depravity, that all men are depraved. All men, both Jew and Gentile, are sinners. And so in chapter 3, verse 9, what then? Are we Jews any better off? No, not at all. We have already charged all, both Jew and Gentiles are under sin. There's a written judgment upon both Jew and Gentile. Now, the unique thing about chapter 2 is this self-confidence. So if you were to outline this, Roman numeral values place that there's self-confidence in the nation of Israel. You have this indictment, as I said before. Oh man, it is this call of Paul to the nation. Oh man, this indictment, this judgment upon them. And he uses then 8 verbs to describe how the Jew is having this self-confidence in themselves. They call themselves, so the first one you probably noticed that they call themselves Jew, and secondly, they rely on the law, they abide by it. Number 3, they brag about their relationship in verse 17 of chapter 2. Another one is they know his will, they know the oracles of God again. Number 5, they approve of themselves as being superior. This is not good, and so they take their boasting in that superior quality of who they are. Maybe it's in their nationality or their ethnicity, as we can do in our own lives. We see ourselves as superior to another group or ethnic origin. And then number 6, these 8 verbs that are describing the Jew itself, they're instructed by a law. Verse 18 says this, and you know his will and approve what is excellent because you are instructed by the law. And then number 7, they're convinced to guide, and they have this embodiment of truth upon them in verse 19. And you are sure that you yourselves are guides to the blind, meaning you revealed this revelation to them, and yet you don't even understand what the law is. And then lastly, verse 20 shows this embodiment of the law and truth on who also teach others, and yet they're not abiding by the law. So as they teach, they don't abide, and they circumvent the law to please themselves and to please in many ways, their appetite. So there's self-confidence, and the self-confidence of the Jew is living this out. And then Paul then turns and moves toward instruction. And in verses 21, he begins to show us 5 rhetorical questions that prove why the nation of Israel is not following the law. In verse 21, you can look at and see how he says, and you then who teach others, do you not teach yourselves? Again, while you preach against stealing, do you steal? Again, these 5 rhetorical questions, verses 21 all the way through 23. You who boast in the law, dishonor God by breaking the law. For as it is written, the name of God is blaspheming among the Gentiles because of you. Likely going back to the Old Testament, Isaiah 52, and also Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 22, as a reference to his support of how the nation of Israel has gone against God. And then lastly, he begins to discuss circumcision in verses 25 through 29, a unique outward sign for the nation that they belong to God. This outward sign of their seal, the seal of their promise, and they were putting false assurance into it and saying that because of their circumcision they belong to God, and yet Paul says, what value of it is it if you don't even obey the law? Why do it? It's very similar to our traditions today. Why do we do the traditions that we do in our churches? Why do we sing certain songs or repeat certain phrases if there is nothing value in it that changes the heart? And I think this is why he closes his thought in verse 29, which I believe is the gospel. He says, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. And I wrote in my Bible, this is conversion. God is looking for the heart. It's always been that way from the beginning. God's looking for what is in the heart, not outward appearances of worship, not outward appearances of obedience. God is looking for the inward heart being changed. And so this is how he sets up this tone here to move us to chapter 3 and launch us moving forward in the book of Romans, that there's a self-confident Jew, this nation of Israel, that thinks that just by merely obeying the law gives them a right standing before God. And Paul says that is not the case. All of the world stands guilty before God, the righteous judge, who will cast us away from his presence. And in verse 18 of chapter 3, he says, there is no fear of God before their eyes. There's no reverence. There's no worship. And that then goes back to chapter 1, where he shows us that the whole world goes against what is right. Their heart is impure. Their motive and their intentions is always against the Lord. May God write this word into your life today. May you be encouraged in the gospel, the salvation of your own heart and your own life. And it's by the Spirit. God is the one who converts the heart. He is the one that changes our mind. And we then stand justified in his righteousness and his righteousness alone. Nothing I do can earn my way to God. Therein lies the gospel. And as you move toward chapter 8, where we stand in justification, is the promise of this new hope, this new life in the Spirit, as the Spirit of God now dwells with us and lives inside of us. May God bless you this week as you continue to grapple with this excellent and most noteworthy book by the Apostle Paul. If you have questions, let me know. Be glad to help you. Blessings.